Well, thank you for joining us, everyone. My name is Dean Wash, and I'm the Global Learning and Development Manager here at Allspill Response. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Andy Couch, who's our Learning and Development Officer. The agenda today is as follows, with the aim being very much to share with you how we are equipping our responders with the skills to be able to perform at their best under pressure. To do that, we're going to cover off the following agenda. We'd like to share with you our understanding of performance and pressure, and specifically how we believe pressure affects performance. So we're going to look at the component parts of each and how they generally interact together. We're going to then introduce you to the Red2Blue Toolkit, and I would like to stress that it's very much an overview at this point. We don't, of course, have the time to cover the whole toolkit in its entirety, but what Andy and I have done today is we've selected what we think are the key parts of the Red2Blue Toolkit. We'd also like to share with you how we're using it here at Allspill Response and the initial results that we're getting. Okay, I would like to say, however, that whilst we've been doing sort of performance under pressure training with our responders for a good time now, a good few years, we've only been using the Vegetable Toolkit this year, so we're not going to make any concrete conclusions today, but certainly the initial feedback and results are very positive. And as you'll hear from Andy in a moment, the pedigree from which this Rugby Toolkit comes from is very good indeed, from the world of sport and business. Hence why we'd like to share it with you today. So without further ado, we'll get into the session proper.
All right, guys, so we'll start with what many people recognise as the world's best team. Certainly over the last decade or so, and that's the New Zealand All Blacks. So with a winning record of about 87%, they won the 2011 and then the 15 World Cups back to back. So really good sort of history in terms of performing and winning. But it wasn't always that way. So the late 90s, early thousands, the All Blacks were classic underperformers. So there was a lot that wasn't working in terms of their leadership, their culture, but also specifically in terms of mental skills and what you might call choking and really underperforming when the pressure crushes in. So the All Blacks did a lot of work, a real broad overview of how they worked, how they led each other, and they did a lot of work with a chap called Gilbert Anoka, who's their mental skills coach. And we are going to look at one of the main threads that the All Blacks use, which is the Red2Blue Toolkit. If anyone is interested in a bit more of what I've just talked about, great book, Legacy. If you haven't read it, it will give you some more on what I've just said. So Red2Blue is primarily about staying blue. Sorry, Dean, if you could just head back just one. Staying blue so that you've got clarity. Once you've got clarity about what you need to do, the actions that you need to do, you are much better able to cope with pressure. So you're able to walk forward. So there's a quote there by Steve Hansen. The whole skill set today is how do you move from being diverted when the pressure crushes on to being blue and being clear on what you need to do next, such that you can develop your competence to walk towards pressure. So it ceases to be something that you try and move away from. You actually can walk towards pressure because it's going to be there for us if we need to perform. So that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to start with the performance triangle, and the performance triangle in a moment basically breaks down three key components of what we think is important when it comes to performing. Before we get there, I just want to lay a really important perspective that we'd like to share. So performance isn't all or nothing. It's neither absolutely terrible and it's zero and everything was wrong, and it's never perfect, So it's neither all or nothing. There's always something to learn from your performance, and you can always get just a little bit better. And so I want to share that perspective as a foundational view. You can always get better at mental skills. Now we've got a dot there in the middle. So let's say you're 50%, your performance was 50 out of 100. Obviously a non-scientific measure, but it was 50 out of 100. We would say to you, so specifically with mental skills, how do you get to 51 out of 100? How do you get just a little bit better and keep moving up that spectrum? So when then we look at the performance triangle itself, there's three key components to what creates performance. And the first one is structure. So in order to perform, you have to have the right structures in place. So if we look at an incident response, for example, IMS, Incident Management System, gives you excellent structure and excellent processes to follow. You're also likely to need quality IT. That's another structure that allows you to make sense out of the chaos, to communicate. So you need those processes. Skill set, you need the right people in the right role with the right skills. In that, I also include technical knowledge. So you need people to have that technical knowledge. That's really important. And most businesses spend pretty much all their time on those two parts of the triangle. And what is less studied, because it's potentially seen as a bit mystical and a bit unclear, is mindset. But mindset is what really enables you to follow the process and to execute and deliver your behaviors when you're under pressure. And we're really clear that mindset is a skill. Now, people may have different starting points, I accept that, but mindset is a skill, and as such, every skill has core components. In this case, the control of our attention is the core component of mindset, and that's what we're going to talk a lot about today. We can learn it, you can get better at it, and Red2Blue have done a fantastic job of creating a set of tools and maps that enable you to develop those core components. Now, something interesting happens to us, because in normal peacetime, we can behave, we can follow processes, but when pressure starts to crush on, it's very easy for us to move down that scalar and suddenly our performance deteriorates. I'm sure you can recognize in yourself when you've had moments, we call it going red, where you start to get the tunnel vision, you become overwhelmed, you get a strong emotional response, your thinking starts to loop. All those things are the red response, and it's driven by three key factors, which we call ESC. So ESC is basically the key levers for pressure, and expectations either from other people who cause pressure in yourself, or self-expectations often drive your own pressure. Any sort of scrutiny from others, you know, judgment and self-judgment, we all know we're often our harshest critic. That can drive pressure and lead us to go red. And when there's consequences at play, you know, when things matter, when the result is important, and if we focus on that result and the consequence, that can really overwhelm us and send us red as well. So the message I'd just like to leave you with before we move on is, if we talk about what is true confidence, and for us, we think about it as it's the ability to control your inner response to any situation. So mental skills is critical in order to be able to do that. If you can do that and you can get better at it, then you are able to walk towards pressure and have a different experience with pressure. So excited to share what's possible today.
Thanks, Andy. Now, to get you into the Red2Blue tools and techniques, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to introduce you to 4 tools over the course of this webinar. But just to help you sort of start to use this for yourself and hopefully see the validity of it, we'd like to invite you to think about what a bad day looks like for you ultimately. Again, this is a personal thing, so don't worry, we're not going to be asking you to share anything today. So I'd like to invite you now to think of your performance nightmare, if you will. Maybe it's real and it's actually happened, or maybe it hasn't and it's just an imagined performance scenario, which would be a nightmare performance scenario for you. We'd like to be really specific with the details, so try and create a vivid picture in your mind. Think about what's happening, or maybe what's not happening. And we just, as you sort of conjure that picture, we'd just like you to notice what's happening with your thinking. What are you doing? And then how do you feel about what's going on in your mind right now? Okay, again, whether you're taking yourself back to a real event that's happened, or whether you're imagining, you know, a bad day for you, a bad performance scenario for you. When we ask people these questions, what we typically find is that there's a busyness about their thinking. Okay, they feel their head feels cluttered. There's lots going on. There's lots of chatter. We often call it, and that in itself brings a feeling of sort of anxiety, tension, and overwhelm. In essence. Okay, so we'd just like to invite you to sort of see how that works for you. So of course, we're all different and we experience pressure in different ways, as Andy has already said. But typically, these are some of the sort of the key responses, particularly in people that haven't done this kind of mental skills preparation. So with that in mind, I'm going to transition to the first tool, which is what we call the 3 circles. So again, coming back to the central theme that Andy's already introduced, that the prime issue here is the control of attention. And if you're not already aware of where your attention goes when you are under pressure, this is a really useful exercise. So as we build this first tool, I would really like you to keep that nightmare performance scenario for you in your mind. So the control circles look like this. And what we'd like to do is invite you, if you have a piece of paper handy, to draw these circles for yourself on a piece of paper in front of you. If you don't have a piece of paper, don't worry, it doesn't matter. You can, of course, do this mentally, but it'd be great if you could draw these now on a piece of paper. What we typically find when the pressure is on is, as I say, our attention is split. We're diverted by many different things. And we can spend, unconsciously, without awareness, we can spend more time than is useful on things that we actually can't control, okay? And maybe at best we can influence them. And here, it's about raising awareness around actually how do we, in the moment when the pressure is on us, you know, when we're feeling every bit of the weight of expectation, scrutiny, and the consequences of our actions, because, you know, in an emergency response, such as an oil spill, there are real consequences, you know, of our actions. You know, there are real expectations, there are imagined expectations, and of course there is real scrutiny, you know, and arguably increasing scrutiny in the 21st century. So the ingredients for pressure are very much there for us in emergency response, and it's very easy without tools, techniques, habits of mind like what Red2Blue can give us. Our attention can be diverted and can wander all over the place ultimately. So in the left hand circle, how this exercise works is we write down within the scenario, the performance scenario that we're visualizing, again, whether it's real or imagined, we write down in that left hand circle, that can't control circle, things that we acknowledge are actually out of our control. Okay, whilst we might try to control them, actually they're out of our control. Okay, so the classic, you know, is weather. Clearly no human being that I know can control the weather. However, many of us spend a lot of time thinking about the weather, what's it going to do, and speculating potentially unduly about the weather. Okay, just one of many that actually we've got no control over whatsoever. Okay, in the next circle, that middle circle there, are things that we can influence. So typically how this exercise works is we start with what we can't control, and then we look again at that circle, and then we look at what we can potentially influence. Okay, we might bring some other stuff into that circle as well, but often when we look at what we can't control, there will be a number of factors within this performance scenario that we can influence with positive action. So we record those things there. And then the final circle is the things that we can control. Okay, now this is a great starting exercise in Red2Blue, because as human beings, we like to have a feeling of control over the things around us. Okay, whether that control is actually real or imagined is a whole different discussion, but we like to feel in control. Okay, so simply by jotting things down on a piece of paper or mentally recalling things and bringing clarity around what we can control or influence is a great way to help us shift to a blue mindset. Okay, so this is the first tool. It's beautifully simple, like many of the tools we're going to introduce to you today, and it's a really good habit that once formed, when the pressure is on us, can really help us find clarity, you know, in that red head moment. So again, just to try and bring this to life for you and make it relevant to you, we'd like to invite you now, you know, to go back to that scenario that you depicted in the last slide, that nightmare performance scenario for you, again, whether it's actually happened, take yourself back to it and maybe dissect the factors at play for you, the things that went wrong, and look at actually, what factors you could control, what you could influence, and what you had no control over whatsoever. Maybe, if it was a real scenario that you're going back to, you can also reflect on actually where did you spend your time ultimately, okay? And often we find that when the pressure's on and we don't perform at our best in the moment, it's because our attention was diverted and we spent more time in that can't control circle than perhaps we wanted to. But of course, in the moment, we weren't aware of it. If it's an imagined scenario, again, break down the factors, be really useful, okay? So, ladies and gentlemen, that's
it. With psychological control. So the tiniest handhold. So if you come to the blue circle, so let's say the pressure's really creeping on. So that inner psychological control. What can I control right now? Well, actually, my breath. That can be the tiniest handhold to allow you just to calm the system down. Take a few breaths. We all know that. So this tool can be used in the moment. It can remind you when the pressure's coming on in the moment, and also you can use it as a preparatory tool, so preparing for maybe a pressurized event. And the key there as well, of course, is to over time develop the skill to let go of the uncontrollables, and freeing yourself up allows you to then concentrate on what you can control, which is far more productive.
And I think you've said it there, Andy. It's that handhold, isn't it? Ultimately, when the pressure is on, and we do feel some of those negative, less useful emotions. Fear, perhaps anxiety, tension, that feeling of overwhelm, perhaps dread. That everyone's looking at me now. I'm the incident commander, for example, or I've got another significant position in emergency response. Actually, it's that handhold. What can I control? Where can I bring my energy? Where can I bring my focus? So yeah, really useful.
Sure. And we're going to keep building the picture, guys, in terms of what blue looks like. So now we're going to look at the heads. So we're going to carry on with this core skill. The prime issue is the control of attention. We're going to repeat that a lot because it's really the key and the cornerstone. Everyone's vulnerable to going red, to having a pressure response. Just to normalize that, we'll all have experienced it. You're all going to experience it in the future. But the key for us, and what the heads tool does, which we're going to look at in a minute, is enables you to make what you call the red to blue shift. So we've gone red. How do we get back on task and get back to blue? So we're going to look at the heads now. Ultimately, it's all about attention. When we go red, we are diverted. Our attention gets split. We are not focused. We are not on task. Some of the things we've already talked about start to come into our mindset, and we disconnect from the task. And with this, you can see there's a strong feeling component that will go with your red state. You can see the jaggedy lines there. There's the friction, the heat, the tension. Whatever that is for you, you'll know that you get a feeling state when you go red. Your mind starts to loop. So you'll see there's 2 white dots there. You'll start to doubt yourself. You'll start to loop. I should, I shouldn't, I can, I can't. So your thinking starts to go round and round. And ultimately, it's interesting, swimmers talk about when they're red, the pool looks darker, the water looks choppier. When they're in the water, they feel it's a bit more of an alien environment. So they're disconnected, and there's that uncomfortable feeling state that goes with it. And what that leads to is some key results for you. So you can get overwhelmed. So thinking and feeling, which starts to not serve you, starts to send you into overwhelm, which is the opposite of resilience, really. When things get too much, we have certain behaviors which we'll look at in a minute. When we're resilient, it's all about focus on what we can control and breaking things down and keeping moving. When you go red, I'm sure a lot of you can recognize you might have been tunnel visioned in the past. So you get fixated on certain things, which means your situational awareness can start to fail you. Humans are classic at ruminating about either, what did I just say? or that didn't go very well, and we think about the past, or we anticipate and we worry too much about what's coming up in the future. And this does all sorts of things to our thinking. The main thing it does, though, it takes us off task, which when you think about performance, performance is a doing, so you need to be on task. So we start to loop, as I said, and another thing that we might do when we go red is we get overly interested in results and outcomes, which sounds curious because we all want great results. But if your attention is fixated on the result and the outcome, it often doesn't help you. And we're going to look at the equivalent of that in a minute when we look at the blue, which is the process. So keep building the picture of going red. It leads to these behaviors which you might be able to recognize in yourself. So you either get aggressive, you know, you get that tension, the adrenaline, the cortisol's flowing around the body, the heart rate's increasing, and we start to get a bit aggressive. It can all actually be a little bit too much, and we start to withdraw. We start to become passive, and we start to almost submit to the situation, and the situation dominates us. And if it gets really bad, we just want to escape. So that can be physically, we either need to leave the room. Any parents out there may well be able to recognize that. Sometimes you just need to leave the room, take a breath. Or psychologically, we escape, we check out. So we're sat around the table, but we're not really there, we've checked out. Now, what I like about Red2Blue is we use lots of coaching methodologies, but Red2Blue is very practical. And what you'll see now is the ESC creates the word escape. So once we understand ESC, which remember is expectation, scrutiny, and consequence, it is the creators of pressure. Now, this is a huge lever to pull, because once you know what creates pressure for you, you can do some great things. For example, if you take the physics definition of pressure, you know, and you pump up a tire, you are physically adding pressure to that tire. When you talk about mental skills, it's a bit of an odd concept to get your head around. Pressure is a creation of thinking. We almost fabricate it in our mind. And it's the ESC and how you relate to ESC which will create your own pressure. Now, just to be clear, there's 100% a real world out there. There are real expectations and consequences, absolutely. But there's a difference between reaction and response. So we can react in an unconscious red way and we get overwhelmed, or, you know, we can respond deliberately. And that is really what Red2Blue is enabling you to do, to respond with calmness and clarity. So we'll keep building the picture. So what is blue? Blue is the connection. This is the swimmer that's feeling at one with the task. The water feels slightly warmer. It looks a slightly different color. It's smoother, and it feels different. So you'll see here, you've got this smooth line. So when we are blue, we're on task. It's a doing. We are connected. We feel like we've got it. And therefore, you've got a trust in yourself. You've got trust in yourself, and you've also got trust in the process, which is what I'm going to speak about in a minute. And with that comes a calmness. So we're very much connected. What that enables you to do is to stay concentrated on the task, on the doing. And it enables you to employ the overview to specific tool. So think about the helicopter. You know, you're able to zoom up, take in the overview, the big picture, remain expansive, but not get stuck there, because that can overwhelm, because then you're able to then come back down and say, right, specifically, what do I need to do now? What do we need to do? And you get back into the moving things forward. So guys, trust the process, that's key. For example, IMS is an excellent process to trust, but one of the best preparatory tools in Red2Blue is planning that process. How are we going to do it? What does our game look like? And then trust that process, and then just follow the plan. What that enables you to do is to stay aware. So you've got expansiveness, you've got clarity, which means you can stay on task. So that is the Red2Blue heads. It's the second tool we want to share with you. Lots of information in there. And indeed, all of these tools you can pretty much pick up and play with, explore. What we would say though is I think this stuff comes to life much more if you work with a performance coach, because they can help you lift the lid, you know, uncover some of your own thinking habits, and enable you to get different perspectives on yourself and pressure. But ultimately, the tools are designed to be really simple and applicable. So when we start to move through the webinar, at the end, we'll talk about rituals. And the ritual is really important. That is something that allows you to move from red to blue. And everyone can create rituals which will serve you when the pressure starts to crack onto you.
And Andy, you said something that for me was really key there. So I just want to emphasize it, that actually it's important that we don't sort of vilify or demonize this redhead state. It's completely normal. You know, I certainly recognize it myself. I'm sure you do. I'm sure everybody does. But ultimately in the performance moment, it doesn't serve us. And, you know, you go back to those 8 behaviors: aggressive, passive, and escape. Yeah, they might not be that overt actually. So we're not talking about, you know, for example, aggression doesn't need to be out and out, you know, full on tantrum in the emergency operations center, for example, you know, where people sort of, you know, bang the table or shout. It can be more subtle than that, but it's, and of course you will know in yourself and maybe the people you work closest with what some of these behaviors look like, but just to notice them ultimately. And again, once we're aware of them, we can then become curious about why they come up in us, you know, what our relationship with ESC is and how we make sense of that. Then ultimately, as Andy's alluded to, develop these Red2Blue rituals which help us shift to this blue state.
Well, and Dean, just to add, I would say it's actually probably more natural to go red. So I'd say we're wired as human beings to respond to pressure in the environment. You know, we're pack animals, so we grew up in tribes, you know, so social judgment does matter. You know, we do want to, you know, status, respect of others. That's all important for us as humans. So I'd say you're wired to look out for that stuff and to maybe feel threatened, and to be blue and be more deliberate with how you stay on task. I wouldn't say it's a natural thing. I'd say it's a skill you can learn. And part of that is how you perceive, you know, am I under threat now? And if I feel under threat, I'm going to go red. Or is this an opportunity to perform? And therefore, how do I go blue? Because it's the same physical response. Our body gets ready, we get adrenaline and cortisol. Interpret it as a threat, we go red. Work on your perception to see it's now an opportunity to perform, which is a bit of a mind game, I appreciate that. But it then sends you in a very different direction.
Thanks, Andy. Do you want to introduce the ladies and gentlemen to the next tool?
Sure. So building on the heads, one of the things that's really useful is to make your thinking explicit, because our thinking and feeling quite often is unconscious. We're perhaps on autopilot, we're unaware. So to make your thinking explicit such that you can almost write out your thought processes on a piece of paper and see them, allows you to get a bit of distance from them and allows you to then choose other more effective ways of potentially behaving when pressure happens. So we call this tool, How Do You Suck? So please don't be offended by it, smile on the face. You know, we can get things wrong. So let's do that pre-mortem. Let's look at how you might get things wrong. So you can make a list of all the ways. So just think you're an incident commander. You can make a list of many ways that you could suck at that role and get them onto paper. And then what we invite you to do is to choose your top 3. So you'll see here we've got the top 3 ways that an incident commander could potentially get things wrong on the inside in terms of their thinking processes. So they could start to go red. As a result, they become aggressive. They create a climate of fear in the room. They start to become tunneled, fixated. They miss the big picture, the situational awareness. They start to potentially lose their self in the IMS process. So the planning starts to suffer. That could be something that happens on the inside. Or they just foot to the floor, accelerator, which really means you engage a certain part of your nervous system called the sympathetic nervous system. Everything speeds up and we just go, go, go. And that ultimately leads to burnout, particularly if you're in an incident which is lasting any amount of time. So guys, we'd invite the incident commander to, how do you suck? Write those down. And then the obvious next step is, okay, so if you can see that train coming, as you see it coming, let's put a mitigation in place, you know, so it doesn't take you by surprise. It doesn't suddenly take control of you. And so we've got 3 just real simple examples there. So if you're overly aggressive, there's something around state and control of your own state. Breathing techniques are wonderful. They engage the rest and digest part of your nervous system, which is called the parasympathetic nervous system. They slow things down. I'm sure you'll all recognize when you're under pressure, our breathing gets a bit shallower, even if it's unconscious. And when we breathe deeply, the heart rate slows down. And that helps us to regulate mood. So that could be something that you practice. And remember, the key is to practice this stuff before you're under pressure. You know, you don't get strong by looking at weights. You got to go to the gym, you got to work out. And it's the same muscle memory with mental skills. So practice in the good times, because then you know it's going to be there for you when you need it. Second one, in order to not be fixated, great principle, the gazing principle of specific to overview. Really great way of zooming out to remain expansive. And one potential way of doing that is to have a trigger word. So it may sound a bit silly, but my trigger word's helicopter. And it means I'm getting into the weeds now. Come on, zoom out, start to take in the big picture again, and then you can come back to task and what you need to do. So trigger words are very common ways of directing your attention. Also, long-term energy management, so point number 3, we've got a bit of a thing in the modern world where if we're not careful, you're always on the go, there's stimulation from everywhere. That does things to your nervous system. You're always on. So developing the skillfulness to check in with your energy, with how you're feeling, and learning the habits that serve you in terms of energy management is critical. And you can't rely on that when you're under pressure, so you've got to practice that. At the end of this webinar, I'm going to talk about something called the FirstBe lifestyle assessment, which is the best tool that we've seen for enabling you to develop really healthy habits around energy management. So that's the suck. And I just invite you now to think, go back to my performance nightmare that you were thinking about. You could easily use this tool and think, do you know what? What did I do on the inside? If I said to you, teach me how you went red, tell me how you managed to screw it up. And you could easily probably identify 1 or 2 things that you did that with a bit of thought and preparation, you could mitigate for next time. You could see that train coming. So the suck, really good tool. Very important to visualize positive outcomes, which helps set your brain up. But also there's something about pre-morteming, looking at what could go wrong. And that's what Dean's now going to go into next.
Thanks, Andy. And yeah, so tool 4, ladies and gentlemen, complements the Screwup Cascade really nicely. So as Andy has said there, the Screwup Cascade is all about what can we do wrong to almost sabotage ourselves. Okay, again, we don't do it deliberately, but in the moment, the pressure's on, we go red, what things do we do? So what thoughts, beliefs, actions do we carry out and entertain that ultimately cause us to mess it up or lower our own performance for ourselves? The what if tool is about what might happen. Okay, we call these derailers. What might happen in the world that can derail our performance when the pressure's on ultimately. So this is a really nice tool, as I say, to complement the Screwup Cascade. So this particular tool encourage us to think about the following questions. So what situations could we train for and rehearse for? So what might happen, and if it does, in advance of it happening, how will I respond? What will I do? How will I act? And of course, there's a lot of confidence that's derived from that process. Okay, and of course, confidence is preparation and action ultimately. Okay. You know, within this, it's the spirit of hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. You know, a classic phrase in emergency management. Okay, how do we do that on a personal level? Okay, and with each diverter or derailer, as we call it, establish where you need to place your attention. Okay, so how this tool works in detail now is, okay, if A happens, I am going to focus my attention on this, which will then follow this, okay? And underneath this is a ritual ultimately. So we call it a Red2Blue ritual. What am I going to do? Okay, so whether it's a trigger word, whether it's a physical motion, whether it's some kind of other action like taking a drink or just breathing deeply, or it might be, there's a trigger card on the wall in the emergency operations center that reminds you to do something. It could be a number of things, but ultimately, if something happens and you notice that you're going red, and of course you can see now that the unintended consequence of going red in terms of bringing your ideal performance to the scenario, actually how do you shift yourself? Okay, that's what it's all about ultimately. So just to give you another example, we are that instant commander again. What if I'm under pressure? So eyes are on me, expectation, scrutiny and consequence are all there, and I notice as an instant commander I start to get tunnel vision. Okay, I feel tense, I feel anxious, and I recognize these things because again I've practiced them in good times, as Andy said a moment ago, and I love that phrase because you can't of course pull this out the bag in the moment of an emergency or any other crisis and obviously expect these things just to work for you. You've got to practice them in normal times, so to speak, when the pressure isn't as much. Clearly we want to then introduce them, and increasingly to more and more pressure in an ideal world, but of course it doesn't always work that way. We don't decide when an emergency situation happens. However, if we build this into our training and we start to notice it, we can then become what we call more inoculated to stress and pressure ultimately, which is really useful. So going back to this scenario, as an instant commander, I start to get tunnel vision, I feel anxious and I tense. And because I've done some work prior to this situation occurring, I notice this stuff happening in me. I then give it a rating. And the reason why giving it a rating is useful is when you do your what if exercise, there will be some things that occur on your list that actually, whilst you recognize it's a very viable scenario for you, and you more than likely might encounter it if this particular emergency unfolds, actually in terms of your own performance state, it won't actually feature that high. So you might indeed give it a lower rating. So this is where you triage, if you like, the what ifs ultimately. And of course, you then start to really build your habits around the what ifs, the derailers that will really affect your performance. Okay, so in this scenario we're going to give this a high rating because I recognize as an instant commander that if I'm handling an emergency, feelings of anxiety, tension, overwhelm that lead me to sort of develop a tunnel vision isn't helpful, is exactly not what I need in this scenario. So it's a big diverter for me. Okay, so I'm going to pay attention to it. So I then develop a Red2Blue ritual around actually how do I notice that my attention's tunneled and therefore shift myself, in this case, to an overview. Okay, now of course we need to be able to adopt that gazing principle, as Andy mentioned a moment ago, where we can with agility shift from overview to specifics. But of course in this scenario that I'm painting now, we've become obsessed with the specifics. So therefore the ritual enables us to take the overview, and then of course with more awareness we can then shift back to the specifics and out again as we need to, so that we perform as required ultimately. So in this case, my Red2Blue ritual might be, I just take a minute because I can probably not afford any more than that. I'm the instant commander in an emergency. So it's not about, unrealistic things of potentially going off and meditating for 40 minutes. Clearly that's not going to help us right now. We can't do that. So again, the art of Red2Blue is all about small but effective things that we can do in the moment to help shift us. So in this case, it might be as simple as just a minute, and we can afford a minute. A minute, we breathe, we maybe get a glass of water, and we just remind ourselves, actually, that act of breathing and taking in a glass of water just reminds us that we need to come back to the overview. And whether we use that helicopter analogy that Andy used a moment ago or something else, it triggers us to move. Okay, and there were some great examples from sport, Andy, aren't there, around athletes that do this. And actually, particularly in the world of professional rugby, where this has been used extensively, there's some really good examples of players that you can see live on the TV actually going through their own Red2Blue ritual.
And I appreciate not everyone's a rugby fan, so apologies up front. But if you have seen the All Blacks play, so Richie McCaw, former captain, took the guys, I think, to 2 World Cups, to victories. He had a Red2Blue ritual. So when he felt the pressure crushing in, he'd do something quite curious. You know, he might join a line out, which is a certain activity in the game of rugby. He'd stamp his foot on the ground, he'd grab his wrist, and that was his physical ritual to snap him back to the task at hand. You got Kieran Reid, again, another former All Black captain. He used a different ritual. And I noticed this before I even learned about Red2Blue. There'd be times where he looks like he's not quite paying attention, but what he was doing, he was looking at each corner of the stadium, take all the corners in, and that was his cue, just to snap out of what it was that was sending him red and to get him back on task. So the key thing with rituals, they can be anything that works for you. No one really needs to know about it, but it's something that enables you to make that Red2Blue shift. Rituals, by their very nature, are something that you practice. So find those that work for you. I'm sure you've already got some, to be honest, that some behaviours or actions that you find helpful. But yeah, developing rituals will serve you really well. Because if we are interested in getting just a little bit better, you know, going from 50 to 51, where that white dot was on that scalar, you need deliberate practice. So psychologists, sports psychologists in particular, talk a lot about deliberate practice. I can drive a car for 20 years, but I'm not going to be a Formula One driver. You know, so experience isn't everything, although it's very important. But with deliberate practice, I can potentially get into that racing car. But it's not going to happen just through autopilot and driving every single day. So deliberate practice is something, and again, guys, it's all your choice. You know, you choose whether and to what extent you engage with this. But what we have found is we've got fantastic people, we've got great structures, people with amazing skills and technical knowledge, and the mindset training is helping to unlock that and enable them to use that even more effectively.
Yes, it's a great conundrum, isn't it, Andy? In any field of performance, you know, whether it's sport, business, emergency response, actually, you can have people that are brilliantly technically minded with all the structures, all the processes, all the technology behind them. Actually, in the moment, they don't rise to the challenge. You know, they never completely fail, probably either. You know, as you said at the start, it's a rarely all or nothing game, isn't it? Performance is rarely ever zero, because you can always find something good in the ashes of a performance, and it's ever rarely 100, because you can always get better. But it's just curious, isn't it, how actually we don't always meet the challenge, you know, as individuals. And yeah, this field, we're finding it, aren't we, that this field of actually mindset training is particularly useful. And one of the things I said at the start of this webinar, ladies and gentlemen, is, you know, like I'm sure all of you, you know, we've focused as an emergency response company, so we've focused on mindset and mind skills training for a number of years. But what we really like about Red2Blue, which was developed by a company called Gazing Performance Systems, who we've partnered with, is it's simple. Actually, the tools and the techniques are simple, so you can practice them when times are good, as Andy says, but ultimately you can develop habits that can work for you when the pressure's on, because anything too complicated, you know what it's like, it's just going to fall down. You don't want another complicated thing to think about, you know, when an emergency is looming, you know, when you're in the thick of it. You don't want a lot more to do. You want stuff that's ingrained, habitualized, and this is sort of the work that we're doing at All Spill Response ultimately. So, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of Red2Blue and our introduction to the toolkit, that concludes this part of the webinar, really. So just in summary, what Andy and I have done is we've introduced you to the Red2Blue toolkit, and specifically 4 tools. So the first tool was the circles of control. The second tool was the heads, which really depicts, you know, the states that we could find ourselves in. We've then introduced you to the Screwup Cascade. So these are the things that we can do to almost sabotage ourselves. You know, what can we do to get it wrong? And then the what ifs, the things that happen or could indeed happen. So likely scenarios, if you will, that will provoke a response in us. And by anticipating that, we can develop habits of mind to ultimately stay blue, or certainly stay more blue. Okay, because again, this isn't about red is bad, blue is good. Certainly from a performance perspective, blue is more beneficial to you. But of course, emotion carries the day as well. And, there's a lot of emotion carried up in the red. So again, it's not about good and bad. It's about actually how do we recognize where we need to be and certainly shift more towards a blue state, okay, which is going to always be more advantageous in an emergency response.
Yeah, and just to top that off, I mean, blue isn't the absence of emotion, everyone. Emotion is still present. We're not talking about being robotic. So there are emotions there, but we've domesticated them. They're not riding our back and sending us into the red.
So what we'd now like to do for a few minutes, ladies and gentlemen, is just share with you how we're using all spill response ultimately. So we started introducing the Vegetable Toolkit at the start of the year. So again, as I'm sure many, if not all of you have done, we've done training previously around how do we equip particularly our duty teams and our responders to better perform under pressure, recognizing of course that it's not just technical skills, there's more to it than that. But what we felt we were missing in some of that development that we've previously done is these simple tools and techniques, things that people can really get hold of and use and practice both before and in the moment. So we started essentially partnering with our duty managers and working with them in our emergency operations centres, very much with whatever came into the room, really. So we deliberately didn't introduce new scenarios. Now, of course, that's always an option for us. And of course, we work with scenarios all the time. I'm sure you do. Of course, they have a place and they're very legitimate. Andy and I opted not to do that. What we've done instead, just to sort of fully share, is we've just worked with whatever's come in the room, because there's normally something going on, whether it's a client exercise that seeks to utilise us and our people, or whether it is of course a real all spill, and we've worked with that ultimately. Okay, and of course some weeks are quieter than others, but we've always found, haven't we, Annie, there's something to work with ultimately. There's something going on that we can always work with. So that's what we've chosen to do. Of course, like all of us, when COVID struck in March, the world changed and we've gone more to virtual emergency operations centres. And like I'm sure many of you have, and we've met that challenge of how do we mount an efficient response, where we can't have as much contact with each other. So what we've done from a learning and development perspective is we've really invoked a blended approach to this. And actually, it's proved really useful to us because we can serve our whole business sort of equally, if you like. So we've employed our learning management system, and you're seeing a screenshot of that system right now. And we've employed what we call a blended approach. And if you're not familiar with that approach, what that enables us to do is effectively share some resources. So in our case, we share a workbook which people can download. There's some information in it about the different tools and techniques, of which the ones we've shared with you today are some of them. And then we invite people to watch some pre-recorded webinar sessions, a bit like this, although they're more bite-sized than this. So typically 10 minutes long, where we introduce the tool and give people some stuff to do ultimately to practice this in good times, as Andy says. They then do that. They notice in themselves what a typical red response looks like for them, how they make sense of that ESC, and then ultimately they develop their own Red2Blue rituals over a period of time. And then at various points we invite them to come back together on a live virtual session, and we invite people to share, because of course we can all learn from each other, we can all get better together. So that sharing is really important ultimately. So in essence, there's a number of modules, 4 in total, and there's sort of 3 component parts to each module ultimately. And what we've found, and this might well help you as well in terms of how might you deploy this across your organisation, is if you're anything like us, you've got distributed emergency response teams all over the place, and I'm sure looking at the attendance list, many of you have got significantly more people to look after in your emergency response teams than we have. We're relatively small compared to some of the organisations that you represent on this call. So the challenge is always going to be, how do we distribute this stuff without having to fly people in from all over the place or fly out all over the place? So we've found actually this blended module is really useful, providing you give people something to do on the job, so it anchors it in the real world, so to speak. It's not just theoretical. And then of course you invite people back to share their experiences ultimately, both what worked and what didn't work.
Hi, Dean. Are you okay there?
Yeah. Absolutely
Yeah,
fine. Do you want to share about the FirstBe stuff, Andy?
yeah, sure. So one of the things we complement this with is the FirstBe lifestyle assessment. So we're certified providers. The FirstBe lifestyle assessment, if you haven't seen it, is used again by lots of high-profile sports teams. It's a really great piece of kit. So ultimately, it is a heart rate variability monitor. So you get wired up for 3 days, this little monitor, and it measures the electrical activity, not of your actual heart rate as such, but the activity in between the heart rate. Now, what's interesting about that is that shows to what extent you're either foot to the floor and engaging that fight or flight nervous system versus the break comes on, you enter rest and digest, and you are entering it into your other part of the nervous system, which helps you to slow down a bit. It also takes into account sleep, exercise, the effects of alcohol, all those things you can see, and there's nothing like seeing your own data, because the report you get is fantastic actually. You see your own data over 3 days and what your stress response is and your relaxation response. Now, why that's critical is you can see how at certain points in your day or even at night, events, how they influence you. You can also see how your habits that you run affect your physiology. So it's proven in terms of research that it increases people's ability to make lifestyle changes. Why we use it, of course, it's fantastic for well-being, and OSRL is a huge promoter of employee well-being, doing some really good stuff in that area actually. But we use it in this case in order for people to see their stress response, because then you can look with hindsight and say, all right, what are some of the practices in terms of the tools or other habits, because we do end up looking at things like sleep and nutrition as well, that will enable you to have more time in the rest and digest, so that when you need to be on and you need to go, your tank's full. So in terms of energy management, it's a great tool. I think if you combine it with mental skills such as Red2Blue or other methodologies, it's starting to give people the edge in terms of the mindset prong of the performance triangle. So just wanted to share it with you really. It's a really interesting area. We're still exploring it ourselves. We're learning lots of things as we go. And really that is the end of the webinar, guys. So just want to thank you. Hopefully you found some of it, if not all of it, useful and insightful. Hopefully it might have given you 1 or 2 things to think about and to apply in yourself. And of course, if you ever want to chat, beware, Dean and I will talk all day about this stuff with you. So you're very welcome to reach out for a conversation if you want to find out more. But that's it, ladies and gents. Thank you ever so much for your time, and have a good rest of the day. Thanks for joining us today.